There's more soup also.
I don't know, maybe there's not that many. 45 people are on. I'm muted and
Sydney, do you want to share the intro slide?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Sydney. I'm the policy fellow here at Act on Mass, and I'm very excited to be doing this workshop tonight with Scotia, where we are going to share some resources that can be used when you're advocating for the issues that you care about. So as we wait for more people to come into the meeting and settle in, I'm going to ask that you introduce yourself. So in the chat, if you could give your name, pronouns, where you're from, an issue that you're passionate about, and if you'd like something that you are hoping to gain from this workshop would also be great. It looks like a few more people came in, so just to let anyone who didn't hear the first little intro know, my name is Sydney. I'm the policy fellow here at Act on Mass, and right now we're just gonna take some time to introduce ourselves and put our responses to these 4 prompts in the chat, and then we'll get started in a few minutes.
I'm seeing some great responses in the chat. Looks like we've got a lot of folks caring a lot about a diversity of issues, which is why this work is so important. So much progress stops at our State House right now. And that's my favorite thing about the work we do as well. Why don't we get started, Sydney?
Sounds great. All right, like I said, I'm Sydney. I'm the policy fellow here at Act on Mass. And a little bit about me, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently in Somerville because I go to school there. And an issue that I'm passionate about is, of course, transparency in the State House, but I am also very passionate about issues about education and making sure that everyone has access to resources that they need. So tonight in this workshop, we're going to go over some really awesome resources that we have when it comes to advocating for the issues we care about. So we already started with our introductions and icebreakers, and we're going to quickly move on to kind of an overview of the Massachusetts legislature's website. Then we're going to go over some tips for when it comes to contacting our representatives, how we can approach conversations with them in ways where we can actually have actions taken and steps taken to address the issues we care about. And then toward the end, we're going to talk a little bit about how you can keep up with us here at Act on Mass. And we'll have time for questions throughout. We'll have slides that say questions. So if you prefer to ask questions by unmuting, that'll be a perfect time for that. But throughout the presentation, Scotia and I will be monitoring the chat for this meeting. So if you have questions in the middle of the presentation, feel free to put them there. All right, and handing it over to Scotia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Scotia. I'm the Executive Director of Act on Mass. I'm seeing some familiar faces in the room, so I'm sure that many of you might be familiar with our work, but for those who aren't, Act on Mass is a 501c4 nonprofit that was founded in 2018. Our mission is strengthening democracy here in Massachusetts by recentering constituent voices in the lawmaking process in Massachusetts. And we fight for this mission through a variety of ways, including pushing for good governance policies, changes at the state legislature that would actually make our lives better. Monitoring the State House, tracking progressive legislation, strengthening grassroots advocacy and the advocacy of our allies through workshops like this one, and also endorsing movement candidates during election years. So, here's a couple of photos of stuff that we've been up to this year. But an important framing for our workshop, because we're talking about citizen watchdogging, right? But why is this our job? Why do we need to do this accountability? And why do we need to learn these skills? I'm sure that anyone who's done a State House 101 might be familiar with some of this, but just for a review, we're dealing with a situation this year where we are facing a multitude of interlocking crises from the federal level, yet we're still seeing legislative inaction from our legislature. So, the Trump administration has been targeting Massachusetts as a deep blue state. We've seen budget cuts, federal cuts to programs that are targeting our main industries in Massachusetts. It's really squeezing our towns and cities that provide resources for our people. And also we've seen, these devastating immigration crackdowns that are really disrupting our ability to participate in public life for many communities in Massachusetts. And yet, the Massachusetts legislature, a Democratic supermajority, has been involved in the slowest year of lawmaking in over 40 years. They've passed the least number of laws of any first year of legislative session since at least the 80s. They have passed, out of all the bills that they have passed, only 6 of those were actually statewide policy changes, and most of them were very minor bills. And that is the product of a year's worth of full-time lawmaking. So it's really clear that there's something, deeply wrong going on. Next slide. Unfortunately, we know that this is par for the course for the Massachusetts legislature. Not only are we ranked incredibly low in transparency, but we are also really low ranked in effectiveness. So, getting bills out the door. And we see that despite Democratic supermajorities, popular common sense legislation dies session after session without a vote. So I'm sure some of the folks in this room would have been involved in advocacy for some of these policies. Same-day voter registration, just to name one. Secretary of State Bill Galvin finally got fed up with waiting for the legislature to pass this one, is taking it to the ballot himself. The Safe Communities Act is a piece of legislation to update our immigration laws for the Trump era that was originally introduced during the first Trump administration and has never gotten a vote. And these are just a couple of other examples of common sense progressive policies that don't even get votes on Beacon Hill. So we know that unfortunately this is part of a wider pattern. And we also can tie this to some ongoing issues. At Act on Mass, this is kind of our theory of what's going on. In an ideal state democracy, there's this relationship between state democracy and, a relationship between voter and legislator, where we get to select a representative based on a slate of our peers. We get to see, their progress throughout the legislative session, and then at the end of 2 years, make a choice of whether we want to, reelect that person or not. But what we see in the Massachusetts State House is that this relationship between voter and constituent is disrupted by particularly 2 key issues. One, most of the lawmaking work happens behind closed doors. So constituents are just completely shut out of that process. And, who retains access? Of course, those that can pay to be there, lobbyists and corporate interest. And we know that there's a tremendous concentration of power in leadership. So even our rank and file representatives are often disempowered to act on our behalf. All of this resulting in a system of weak representation. And I'll remind us all that, next year's an election year. So the ability to keep an eye on what our legislators up to and start to reestablish that relationship of accountability is something that we can start this year. Let's get to work. So without further ado, we're going to get into some of the citizen watchdog work. And just responding to some of the questions I see in the chat, the recording and the slides will be made available after that.
Awesome. Thank you, Scotia. So before we get into actually looking at the legislature's website, we just ask that you have a few tabs open, a few key resources open before we get into this. And of course, if you prefer to just sit and watch along as we go through this ourselves, that's totally fine, but we find it's helpful to have access to it yourself. So first, we're going to ask that you open the Massachusetts legislature's website. So that's malegislature.gov. And if you'd like, you can also open two key tabs that we're going to be looking at, which the first is Find Your Legislators tab, and the second is the Bills tab. And I'll show you how to navigate to that very soon. And second, we're also going to ask you to open the Beacon Hill tracker. So this can be found via a link on the worksheet that we sent out prior. And if you don't have access to that worksheet, no worries. I'm going to have a QR code for that up in a moment as well. But in the meantime, Scotia is also going to help out by adding some of these links to the chat. And this is what the worksheet looks like. It's called the Citizen Watchdog worksheet. So you can access that via this bit.ly link if you type it into your search bar, or through this QR code if you have a different device with you.
I just put all three of those links in the chat. So you should have gotten the worksheet in a previous email, but it's in the chat if you want to follow along. It's a Google Doc, so you either have to download it or make a copy so that you can fill it in yourself.
All right. So now that we have those tabs open, we can get started with navigating the website, what that's going to look like. So what we really want to look at to begin with today is who our legislators are and where they sit in Beacon Hill's power structure. And the way you can find that information out is by navigating to the legislature's website. So when you first open it, this is what the homepage looks like. There's a bunch of different interesting tabs and links. They do love their hyperlinks. But right now we're just going to focus on this legislators tab. And say you're helping a friend figure out who their legislators are. They don't know who they are already. You can go to this link right here, click on it, and you'll be able to put in whichever address you're registered to vote at. Okay. And when you do open, or rather when you do get the information for your senator and representative, it's going to look something like this. So it'll have all this great information about the bills that they've sponsored, so the bills that they might have filed in the session, bills they've co-sponsored, so bills that they have officially signed on to as being supporters of. And you'll also see their committee assignments, which will be important when it comes to advocating for specific issues, because you want to know where to go and who to go to about the issues that you care about. But before we give you some time to fill that out on your own, I first wanted to give you a little bit more info about why this is important. So, why do we need to know this information? Why do we have to see our legislators' committee assignments? Well, that's because it can really inform your advocacy approach. You could ask yourself questions such as, who is on the committee that concerns the issue I care about? So if you're concerned about an issue on extremely high energy costs, then you're going to want to focus on the committee on energy. And then you can think to yourself, well, is my legislator on this committee? Are they on a committee where I could have a different priority addressed by advocating to them about it? Or maybe a friend has a legislator who is on this committee. And finally, you can think about, well, what can I advocate for? Say, you know what, my legislator has no ties to any committees that have to do with energy or costs, energy costs. Then I'm going to think, well, what can I advocate for in my district that can have some real action taken on it? And unfortunately, we need to know how to advocate for these issues because a lot of the time our legislators are disincentivized from taking action. when our legislators don't act according to House and Senate leadership, so for example, Speaker of the House, he has a lot of power in our legislature because he's able to control the stipends that are given to our legislators. And when our elected officials are afraid to disobey leadership because they fear they're going to lose a significant source of income or some influence that they have, for example, in a leadership position or a committee chairship, then they're not going to be able to actually advocate for the issues that their constituents care about. So, like I said before, we're going to go back to this worksheet a few times throughout the presentation. But right now, we're going to give you a couple of minutes to look up your own legislator and see their names, their party, but specifically different ways you can contact them and their positions. So on the updated version of the worksheet, which looks like this in the Google Doc format, you'll also be able to see that we added a different aspect to this little section when it comes to recording information about our legislators. This link is something that Scotia will go over momentarily, but what we really want to focus on right now is finding our senator, our representative, and then also their leadership positions. And the thing is, when you do look at these little bio pages, you're not going to see all of the key information that might be useful. So you're also going to want to go back to the legislators tab right here, and you can navigate to all leadership positions. When this loads, it looks something like this, and you'll be able to see all of the other leadership positions that our legislators have outside of their committee assignments, because committee assignments aren't the only form of leadership position in our legislature.
So I should have just dropped a Word file for the worksheet in the chat, if that's easier for folks to download. And you can use that to fill in your legislator's own information based on the sites that Sydney just highlighted. Sydney, can you show the other leadership positions again?
Yes, I can. So if you're going to it from the homepage on the legislature's website, you're going to want to go to the legislators tab. Under legislators, you can see legislative leadership, and they'll have all these different ones. I like to go to all leadership because that way I can actually see for both branches in the legislature, and this is where it will take you. So if you know who your representatives are or your representative and senator are, then you'll be able to see if they're on this list as well. And you can record that information. Okay. So feel free to continue filling out this worksheet. If you haven't been able to finish it just yet, I know it's like a lot of information. We're going to be going pretty fast through this. But if you have and you'd like to, feel free to put the information you found in the chat. Do you have a legislator who's in a leadership position or on a specific committee? We'd love to know if you were able to find that information. All right, great. It looks like a good amount of you guys were able to find some key information about committee assignments and other leadership positions. So now that you guys have a pretty good understanding of that, I'm going to hand it back over to Scotia so she can talk a little bit more about why stipends and why leadership positions are so important.
Yep. Thank you, Sydney. Just responding to something I saw in the chat. So senators tend to be on more committees because there's fewer of them, and almost all of our substantial work in legislature happens through joint committees. So they get a little bit more spread thin through the committees, and they're more likely to have leadership positions. So next, we're going to talk about another piece of legislative power structures, which is how much your legislators paid. As Sydney was talking about, the position that your rep sits in, whether that's a chairman position, a member of leadership on the House or Senate, that determines how much they're paid. And that is a position that is totally controlled by leadership. So legislator pay on top, they get these additional stipends on top of their base pay that are become very hard to track. And so something to know for us to know as constituents is how much our legislators are being paid by leadership, how much of their pay is controlled by leadership. It's helpful for us to know for where they sit in the power dynamics. So I'm sharing another link for those who are able to click on it. This is the payroll site for all state employees in Massachusetts. And then I think I should share my screen for a second, Sydney, if that's okay. So I'm going to share here. Can everybody see the statewide payroll?
Yep.
Okay. So my senator is Sal DiDomenico. So I'm going to search him here. And then it's going to come up that he's paid $193,000 a year for his job in as a senator. And I know that all representatives are paid a base pay of $82,000 a year. So I know that most of his pay is coming from his stipends that leadership gives out on top of pay. And so I can actually see on this site, which is really useful, how much his pay has increased over the years and how long it's been that most of his pay has been this extra stipend that's controlled by leadership. So this is also helpful to know how much leverage leadership has over my representatives. And I can look up my my representative too. My representative is Mike Connolly. One thing to note is that usually they don't have their nicknames. So if Mike Connolly usually goes by Mike, but I have to look up Michael Connolly. So I can see that Mike Connolly, he has a small stipend that's tied to his vice chairmanship position. So this is just another way to check up on how much our legislators are paid. And we can also go to the House of Representatives totally. If we go by employee, we can see who's paid the most in the House and Senate. And so Ron Mariano, the Speaker of the House, obviously gets the most in pay. He has a stipend of $119,000 a year, which is much more than doubling his base pay. What I think is interesting is that House Counsel's the second highest paid person in the House. But you can also peruse this on your own time just to see where your own representative sits within the hierarchy of the House. Is it back to you, Sydney?
I believe so. Right, here we are. So thank you, Scotia. And the next thing we're going to be going over is trying to figure out how to find different bills that we might want to advocate for. So to begin, what is a bill? In very simple terms, it's like a proposed new law or proposed alteration to an existing law. But if you want to get really technical with it, it is technically the exact language that is going to be changed in Massachusetts general law. And a lot of times when you're looking at the legislature's website, it can be really hard to navigate. It can be hard to find what you're looking for. It can be hard to use the filters. They tend to be a little bit finicky. So what I like to do is I like to look to trusted organizations and see which bills that they are sponsoring or supporting this session. And a lot of times they will update every session. So for example, if you look at Progressive Mass, or if you're subscribe to our Saturday Scoop, we also put the new bill numbers specifically a lot of times in our Saturday Scoops and blog posts. So that's a good way to kind of first get used to finding out the actual bill numbers, because bill names, there can be a lot of different names for bills that seem similar, but actually do very different things. So when it comes to actually looking at the legislature's website, I first go to the Bills and Laws tab. And there's a lot of different things on here again. but you can also search for specific bills. So I know I'm looking for a specific bill on wage theft. I can either type wage theft, which is going to give me a million results that is a little bit hard to navigate, or I can look to the bill numbers that I got from a trusted website or a trusted organization, I should say, and find it right here rather easily. Great. So I'm really concerned about wage theft. I want to advocate for wage theft. And great news, my senator is Sal DiDomenico, and he is the person who filed this bill. So I'm able to see all this great information about the bill's history, so where it has been, where it's going, when the hearing for this bill was. I can also see which other legislators have petitioned or signed on as petitioners, aka signed on as co-sponsors. So they're voicing their support for the bill in a very official way. And that is a good first step to see who you can go to when it comes to addressing certain issues you care about. The last thing on this specific bill page that is very helpful is a lot of times they'll have either primary sponsor summaries, committee summaries, or both types of summaries. And that can just tell you a little bit more about the bill, so you don't have to go here, read the actual language, which is oftentimes very long, very confusing, and addresses the specific language that already exists in Massachusetts general laws. So it's hard to figure out what's actually being changed. But when I'm looking at bills like this, I can see the different committees that the bill has been in or where it is currently. And a lot of times they'll put that here in the bill history, which might not always be updated, but usually they do a pretty good job at adding the hyperlinks, like I said. And wage theft was in the Joint Committee on Labor and Workforce Development. So when I click on that link, I'm able to see a lot more about the members of this committee, so other people I can go to for help addressing this issue. I can look at the bills that are either still in committee or out of committee, and I can search my bill number. So like I said, it was S1300, S because it was filed in the Senate, and I can search. It's not here currently, so let's see if it's been reported out. Great, so we can see that this bill was reported favorably out of committee when it comes to the Senate version of this bill. But a lot of bills also have different versions, so there could be a version in the House. In this case, this is the House version, and I'm able to see even more information, which is really annoying at times because you have to sometimes look in multiple places to find just the basic information on an issue. But in the House's version, we can see how our committee members voted on this bill, or who was present for the hearing, sometimes how they voted on the bill. And that is additional good information to have. And like I said, if you have any questions, I know I'm going through this super fast, but feel free to put them in the chat. And the last thing I'm going to show you before I hand it over to Scotia is the committee pages. So like I said, the committee pages are here, but I'm actually going to go to the hearings section so I can look and see when specific bills have been testified on or received testimony. So in my case, I know that the hearing was held on October 28th. So I can actually click on the link that's there under the hearings tab, and I can find a lot more good information. So I can see what other bills were heard during this hearing. I can watch the recording of it. I can see the attendees.
Hi, Janet,
And
Sandy. I'm so glad you've seen you.
some of the time, they will also have the committee summaries of bills. In this case, wage theft does not have that, neither do the other bills that were heard during this hearing, but a lot of times there'll just be an additional tab right here. You can also find information about if you want to submit written testimony about different bills to this left side. Okay. And the last thing, when it comes to hearings, if you're not sure which hearings for which committees you're looking to go to, you can come to this tab here that's called Hearings and Events. You can click on Hearings, and it'll take you to this nice calendar where you can look and see when hearings are actually being held. All right. And that's all I have. So I'm going to hand it back over to Scotia so that she can talk a little bit about where the bigger issues lie when it comes to actually getting bills passed in our legislature.
Great. Thanks, everybody. I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat. Doing my best to respond. But should we stop for questions now, Sydney?
I
Okay.
think that's a good idea.
Yeah, why don't we stop? And I'll respond to some questions that I'm seeing in the chat. To respond to a question from Isa, who says, shouldn't we know by now whether a given bill was favorably voted out of committee, especially on the Senate side? Why isn't this listed on the page? That's a great question. So because of updated joint rules, the deadline for all bills had been shifted to December 3rd. Unfortunately, what we're finding is that a lot of bills have been granted deadlines, which hasn't necessarily been reflected on the page. And a lot of them are also running past their deadlines without explaining it, which is a great lead in to another tool that I'm going to show you how to use that we had you open at the beginning, is a Beacon Hill compliance tracker. I'm going to do a review of this really quick, and then I'll come back to some more questions. And yeah, can they possibly make this more confusing is a great question. Um, but this tool, Beacon Hill Tracker, is designed to make it a little bit easier. Can you let me share my screen, please, Sydney?
Mhm.
Thank you guys all for sticking with us. We'll try to make this as clear as possible. So the Beacon Hill Compliance Tracker was designed to make it easier to find things on the legislature's website, and also to track whether the legislators are following their own rules. One place to start here would be to look for your legislators' committees. So I know I'm looking on my worksheet. My legislator is the Senate chair, the vice chair of the Senate Committee on Ethics, for example. So I'm going to go into the Beacon Hill Tracker, and I can look at how the committees have been performing. So I can find my legislators' committee right here, and looking at, let's say I'm going to look at the Joint Committee on Education. I can see how much they've been following their own rules. And we can see that the biggest violation is that some bills haven't been reported out. So that's something that we're seeing kind of across the board with a lot of legislative committees. But this tool can also be really useful for finding votes that are hard to see on the website, or yeah, figuring out whether or not a bill has been reported out. As someone pointed out in the chat, it can sometimes be really hard to tell. What was the number for the bill we were looking at, Sydney?
S1300.
Okay. So I'm going to put in S1300 in the Beacon Hill tracker. Mm. Okay, one second. Yeah, so I can see that this is an act to prevent wage theft. This is a bill that's been non-compliant. So the summary has been posted. There was only 8 days for hearing when it needed 10. We have not seen a vote, and it has not been reported out, and it does not look like the deadline has been shifted. So this tool is a really helpful one to kind of make your work as a citizen watchdog a little bit less stressful, because it's automating some of the finding of votes, which has been really buried. But I'm going to talk another way, talk about an aspect of the state legislature that has been really also complicating this issue. Hopefully might clear up some of the questions that we have. One second. Everybody see this? Omnibus bills? Okay. So this is another trend that's happening in the legislature that's complicating the work that we do as advocates. as the legislature has kind of stopped passing these individual policy change bills. As we saw with their progress this year, only a very small portion of the bills passed were actually statewide policy changes. And this has been true across the last couple of sessions. Here's a review that was done by our friends at Progressive Mass of the last legislative session. As you can see, the vast majority of bills actually passed, individual bills that contain specific language, like Sydney was talking about. Only a small portion of those were standalone bills, just about 10%. Instead, we're seeing that more and more committees are passing these enormous bills, putting a lot of pieces of legislation together into big bills, or tacking policy changes onto budget bills as a way of getting them through. And the impact that that has for us as advocates is that it changes the way that we're able to do advocacy. Instead of building numbers among the rank and file, convincing a majority of legislators to co-sponsor our legislation, it means that we have to spend our time currying favor with the few members of leadership on each committee that put together these omnibus bills. So it just, really hinders our ability as grassroots advocates to push for change in the legislature. We're going to look at an example of this. A bill that was recently passed in September is the Senate Data Privacy Act. And this bill actually started as 3 bills that were filed with the Joint Committee on Advanced Information Technology, the Internet, and Cybersecurity in January. So they were filed in January. They were passed to this committee in February. The committee turned them into another bill called Senate S2516 that was 71 pages long. It was then moved to Senate Ways and Means because it contained some aspects that related to money. All money bills passed through the Ways and Means. Senate Ways and Means redrafted the legislation. They turned it into Senate Bill 2608. And if you're still with me, this then passed to the floor of the House and Senate. Sorry, the floor of the Senate. Who amended it. They, attached amendments to it. Senators voted on the amendments, and it was approved by the Senate as Senate Bill 2619. So not only does this have implications for, knowing how our legislator feels at every moment, because, how do we know how our legislator felt about the specific provisions contained within S29 when, it went through so many iterations, but it also makes it a little harder to track. And when we get such few votes, so as you can see, the only vote that we get on the floor, the only vote that most of our legislators took was on this final piece of the legislation. It makes it a little bit harder for us to track. But I'm going to show you guys how to follow this through the legislature's website. So give me 1 second as I switch it over. So I've searched for that number. That's the final bill that had a vote on it. Senate Bill 2619, an act establishing the Massachusetts Data Privacy Act. So I can click on this. And as you can see, there's no committee vote on this because I saw that it passed through multiple different committees. So a little trick to know if something's an omnibus bill is if it has another version that's linked on the bill page. So here I can actually see how my senator voted on it. So I can see that there's a roll call, 71. My senator must have voted for it because it passed unanimously. But I can also go back through the bill history of this bill to try to see the previous iterations of it and what happened to it. So make sure to click through. Here's where I can actually see the amendments. I don't know why it's like this. I can see the amendments that were made on the bill. So I can see, if my legislator filed an amendment. I can see here the text of those amendments. And I can see whether they were voted on or not. And if they were voted on, which some of these must have been, I should be able to see in the Senate Journal for that day what the vote was. I'm going to go back to the bill history. You could see that there was a previous draft, 2516, I can click through to that, and here's where I can finally see, the original source of this bill, the fact that it was a new draft of these three pieces of legislation. And as a reminder, we can always click back through. Here's also where I can see some of the committee votes. So this is how it was treated when it moved through Senate Ways and Means. And then here's the vote from the original committee. So just remember, if it seems like some information is missing when you're looking at a bill, check to see if there's another version that's listed. And then I can kind of click through and find some more of that information. So finally, I can see the final piece that was passed by the Senate Ways and Means. And if I want to go find the vote, this is different from House or Senate, but usually you go to the Senate journals and the House journals. So I can go to the Senate journal for that day. It was passed. Oops. It was passed on September 25th. So I go to the clerks. The clerks are the ones that keep all the records. So I go to the Senate journals. I click through to September, and here I can download. Oh, never mind. They don't have the Senate journal for that day. This is why we do this work. So I'll give them a call tomorrow. But yeah, you can click on the roll call on the previous page. And never be afraid to send us at Act on Mass an email if something's coming up wonky. This is something that we do all the time, so happy to explain it. Where are we? Any questions now at this point in the process? I know that we've been throwing a lot at you. Yes, Liz.
Can you track the version of the bill that's on the House side for the same bill and see if they've done anything with it? Because we're going to find a lot of bills that the Senate moved and voted on and the House did nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. So for this particular bill, because it was, the Senate version that they made was a combination of three different Senate bills, we find that there isn't an exact replica on the House side, and that's pretty common. But what you can do is look at what other House bills are in the same committee. So the data privacy bill that we're talking about came out of the Joint Committee on Advanced Information Technology. And so let me look. Going back over here, I can go to committees like Sydney was showing us. Here's where we can find the joint committees. So I can go to the Committee on Advanced Information Technology, the Internet and Cybersecurity, and see what bills are in committee on the House side. So here we have some that are relative to internet privacy rights, but I know that the House recently voted out a version. And so here's where I can go and see which House bills they've voted out on this side. And they had recently done one on data privacy. So here's where you can see kind of what the House has been working on. Obviously, they sent quite a few to study. A couple of them have been favorable. And so that's one way you can kind of see how things are going on the House side. But you're right that oftentimes you'll see, something being moved in the Senate and not in the House. Norma, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. I found that a lot of things have changed with this legislative session. I know you can't cover it now because do you cover how a bill is becoming law? Because I see a lot of changes that are confusing this session. Are you going to be covering that now or at other point?
Yeah, we're not covering that one in this particular training. Usually we talk about that in the State House 101, so this is a little bit more
Okay.
focused on website skills. But yeah, unfortunately, the omnibus bill process has been really disrupting some of the kind of
Right,
classic
right.
understanding of
Right.
how a bill becomes a law. Now, much more often, you're seeing policies tacked on to these bigger bills, rather than kind of going through the process themselves from committee and getting a committee vote and moving through the process. So that's why it can be important to learn how to follow the progress of one of these bigger bills back through the website because, it's not really mirroring the traditional process.
Great, that's a helpful tip because I see that's a real big problem this semester. I mean, not this semester, this session with the omnibus bill. Okay, thanks.
Yep. I think I'm going to give it back to Sydney to talk about tips for contacting your representative. Or is it still me?
This is still you, but I can share. if
All
you
good.
need.
I got it.
Okay.
All right. So we're going to talk about some tips for contacting your representative using the information that you now know. So number one, we recommend you to refer back to your worksheet. Some of these pieces of information can be really useful. And again, locating your legislator, now if you are following a particular piece of legislation, and your legislature is not on that committee, you can ask them, whether or not they're reaching out to their colleagues that are on the committee, etc. You might know a little bit better how close they are to leadership because of the committees that they sit on and the salaries that they pull. So don't be afraid to refer to this, and we've got some ideas about how to do that. But really emphasizing strength in numbers. I always tell people, our state representatives hear from us a lot less often than congressional representatives do. So it makes a huge difference when our state reps hear from their constituents. They're not used to, hearing from us on particular legislation or about, with some of the specific knowledge that we have here. But, it's always more powerful if you get one of your neighbors to do it with you, if you get a couple of your neighbors, if you share on the town Facebook page, things like that. They have incredibly thin skins, as I remind everyone. So, it's always important to kind of gather together on this one. And we should also be aware of bias towards our legislator. So, everybody, there was a poll that found that 52% of people think that most legislators are corrupt, but only 32% of people think that their legislator is corrupt. So we like to remind ourselves that healthy constituent-legislator relationships require skepticism. And, we're dealing with this broken state house. As we saw, there was very little progress made this year. All of our legislators can and should be doing more. So don't be afraid to, remind yourself that our legislators work for us. With that in mind, we're going to talk about 4 steps for powerful, accountable grassroots lobbying. And we're going to go through these one by one so that we can, use our skills as citizen watchdogs. Back to Sydney.
Awesome, thank you. So what is a hard ask? In simple terms, a hard ask is when you come to your representative or legislators with specific demands in mind so that you can actually see whether or not they are going to take action on an issue. Next slide. Thank you. So why do we ask? Why are we asking them to advocate for a specific bill, to co-sponsor a specific bill? Whatever your demand is, why are we doing this? Well, number one, you're alerting your legislator to an issue and you're holding them accountable on that issue. So you are having your issues addressed yourself, and also fellow constituents. They probably have similar concerns. Additionally, you're empowering your legislator to act. A lot of times, like we've been saying, they don't feel that they have the backing, whether they're worried about the next election cycle or they're worried about losing a stipend or a leadership position. They don't feel that they have the power to act unless they know that their constituents are concerned about an issue and that they will back them when they are fighting for this issue. Okay. So there are certain key elements of the hard ask that we'll go over right now on this next slide. So number one, you're going to want to give context to the necessity of your demand. So what's this issue? What's at stake, really? And then you're going to want to follow that up by highlighting how your legislator and their constituents will benefit from this ask. You're also going to want to limit the possibility of no as an answer. Typically, you want to keep these answers yes or no, so that way you can say, well, yes, my legislator has actually done what I asked them to, or no, they have not done it. And lastly, you're going to want to keep asking. You can either escalate your demands if they are actually taking the steps that you're requesting them to take, or if they still haven't done something as simple as co-sponsoring a bill, then you can say, please co-sponsor this and keep coming with that same ask. So, for example, especially when it comes to giving context, you're not going to want to just walk in and say, I would like to see you co-sponsor this specific bill. You're going to want to add context. So you want to say, for example, in the case of a union for state house employees, you can come by saying, you know what, ensuring the right to unionize is very important, and it allows for Massachusetts and the state house to operate in a way that actually serves its constituents and its legislators, its employees, etc. Will you support their efforts by co-sponsoring this bill?
Thanks, Sydney. Yeah, I think another really important part of that is that our legislators are not used to being asked yes or no questions. As we saw, they're pretty good usually at avoiding taking votes on particular issues. So, starting with a hard ask is really important for getting them to say yes or no so that we can use that information to judge whether or not we want to vote for that person again. But with that in mind, we also need to move beyond co-sponsorship. As we talked about with the omnibus bills, very infrequently these days are you seeing these individual pieces of legislation move through the process. Oftentimes reps can and do co-sponsor bills without any intention of advocating for them or voting for them. So, we're always looking to kind of boost that advocacy, starting with co-sponsorship, but also moving beyond. So here's a couple of examples of ways that we can escalate our ask with our knowledge about how co-sponsorship works, how the legislature works. Always asking for something more public. Will they commit to testifying in favor of the bill? Will they send a public letter to the chairs of the committee asking them to report the bill out? Will they send a public letter to the Speaker, Senate, President asking to make sure that this bill comes to a vote? And, keeping in mind that they work for us, they can always do more. And Sydney's going to talk briefly about some tactics that our legislators will use to respond to us and how we can overcome it. We're getting low on time, so we'll try to keep this quick.
So legislating in simple terms is the variety of different argumentative tactics that our representatives can use against us to kind of put a wall between us when it comes to conversations. So they often do this to preserve the status quo, to avoid committing to a specific position, or to avoid responsibility for a problem. So this can look like a number of things, but there are a couple key examples that I think it's helpful to just highlight so you know what to look out for when you're having these conversations. To begin, sometimes our legislators will like to transfer responsibility. So, for example, if you come to them about an issue that really does pertain to them, such as the State House Union, they might try to say, you know what, it's not an issue for me. It's the issue that my colleagues might be dealing with. And they could say a whole number of things, but really you want to ask yourself, is the legislator positioning this issue or this demand that I'm coming to them with as somebody else's problem? Another way that our legislators can put walls and conversations with us in between us is on the next slide. Thank you. Derailing the conversation. So you could come to them once again talking about the State House Union, and they can respond with, I'm actually working on a bill right now that addresses this totally different issue, which is a really great issue to address. But you know what? It doesn't actually pertain to what I just asked you about. So are your legislators responding directly to your clear demands? Have they taken over the conversation? Have they been speaking at you rather than with you for 5 to 10 minutes? Chances are they're trying to derail the conversation. The third tactic that is often used is punting the conversation. So this is more focused on the timelines. They'll say, I don't have enough time to actually address your concerns. And you can say, you know what, I think you actually do, because especially when they try to use the budget season excuse, this typically only pertains to legislators who are on the Ways and Means Committee, who actually have to put together the ginormous budgets that we have in our state. So if they're claiming to be too busy, chances are they're not. they should be doing their job more efficiently and actually speaking with you. And I believe this is the last one, lying, gaslighting, patronizing. This is the catch-all for literally anything else they can try to say to you so that they don't actually have to take action on the issues that you're concerned about. They might say, you know what, this isn't a real issue. Like, you don't understand the implications of this bill if it is passed, blah, blah, blah. If they're trying to imply that the only reason you support this legislation is because you don't know any better, that is a ginormous red flag that you should keep in mind. But there are ways where we can deflect this legisplaining that our representatives might try to use. And there's 3 key steps that you should do in this order that can help address that issue. Number 1, you're going to want to call them out on it. You're going to want to let them know that you're seeing what they're trying to do with this conversation. So you can say, well, we know that there are a lot of other important bills, but that's not what we're asking you about. We're asking about this specific bill. The second thing you want to do is take it big picture. Really give them the context for the issue once again, and try to make it known to them that you care about this issue, other constituents care about this issue, and there's reasons why we support this issue. And finally, you're going to want to repeat your hard ask. Like I said before, if at first you don't succeed, try again. So you can finish this conversation or this small part of the conversation by saying, will you support their efforts by co-sponsoring this bill? And these are just some quick tips to keep in mind when it comes to getting ready for conversations. So know the issue, learn about some of the arguments that can be used against you.
And finally, your last step, making a plan to follow up. This is really important for developing that relationship of accountability. So they know, they've either made a commitment or not, and they know they're going to keep hearing from you. So we can use some of the watchdog skills, some of the tips that we learned tonight to kind of boost our connections with our representatives. So, I can tell my senator, thank you for voting to move the Data Privacy Act out of committee. It's important for them to hear from us when they do things we like as well, because otherwise they're only going to be hearing from people that don't agree with us. We can say, I'm writing to follow up on your commitment to write a public letter to Speaker Mariano expressing your support for State House staff unionization. So, when we've done an escalation beyond co-sponsorship, it's important to check in. Or, since I know that my senator's on a particular committee, I can ask them, if there's something missing from the transparency standards, I can say, when can we expect to see that scheduled for a hearing? Here's a tip that we were talking about a little bit in the chat. It's helpful to include their aide in communications. So the first time that you hear from your legislator, it's likely that their aide will respond. I always save that email and I try to include it every time I email my representative or call them, just because, it's a nice personal touch. It's usually the aides that respond anyway. So it can be a crucial point of contact for flagging things to your representative. And it's important to maintain momentum. So, starting with an email ask and then, like we said, going up to community outreach, planning a lobby meeting. Representatives, they will set up a meeting with you and a couple constituents if you set it up. There's a couple local groups that have been doing this. The Cambridge Committee for Transparency and Accountability is a great example. So we've had a lot of success with this model. Someone mentioned in the chat writing a letter to the editor, or even planning a public forum, doing direct action. These are a couple of ways to kind of continue building momentum on what we've learned. I think I'm just gonna finish it right up, and then we can do questions after. Sorry that we're running up right against time. Just if you want to keep up with Act on Mass, you can sign up for our weekly newsletter, the Saturday Scoop, where we try to break things down a little bit in writing rather than through this workshop. We kind of let you know what we've been up to every week, what the legislature's been up to, and put it in the context of kind of ongoing issues of transparency. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky. And last but not least, thank you for coming. We can take some questions for people that are able to stay past 7:30. And thank you so much for your time. And thanks to Sydney. Shout out to Sydney, our wonderful policy fellow, for putting together this workshop. All right, questions for people that can stay. Actually, wait, really quick. Do you think we can do just a quick photo of people that are still here? I'll just take a screenshot. So smile if you can. Thanks. Perfect. Yeah, we can stay for questions for anyone that is willing to stay. Brandon, did you want to start? And yeah, for those who can't
Yeah.
stay, thanks so much for coming. We really appreciate it. Hope you follow us on social media and sign up for our newsletter.
Yeah, my question was just so my understanding is that you can track what's going on in these committees, like you can see how they voted as of the rule changes. But
Yes.
then if it goes to like a voice vote or something like that on the for like an omnibus bill in the general court in either the House or the Senate, then we've kind of like lost the ability there to find out how they voted.
Yeah.
Maybe. And is that, do you think are we losing important information when it goes to the general house and we don't see how they voted? Or is it probably we now can learn quite a bit by just seeing how they vote in committee?
Yeah. That's a great question. So the committee votes I find have been really instructive because most bills are getting a committee vote, and a lot of those are still like, the specific language, smaller individual bills. Whereas things that
Hmm.
move to the floor tend to be those bigger omnibus bills where it's harder to tell, what aspects of it our representatives are actually supporting. So that's one positive thing about getting the committee votes is they tend to be a little bit more specific, so we can actually see how our representatives stand on particular positions. Yeah, but it is unfortunate how many things are passed on a voice vote. For those that aren't familiar with what a voice vote is, that's when instead of taking a roll call where, everybody's name is attached to their vote, basically whoever's presiding, it might be the speaker, just says, this will be taken by a shout of the yeas and nays, and then they just say the yeas have it because they already know. And so nobody actually says anything. And so then we don't get a record of who stood what way. So it's another way that they kind of avoid accountability. But yeah, this year getting those public committee votes has been a tremendous boost because, everything that's moving out of committee tends to be getting a committee vote. So that's really helpful. Rena, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just confused about now, like there's a bill, say, that had a hearing, and I don't know right now whether or not it got passed out of committee, but suppose it did, then what happens next? Like, is there going to be other hearings that we can go to? Will it go to, what's the next part of the process that we can be involved in once it goes through that first step?
Yeah, great question. So usually bills get their public hearing in their first committee, and that's kind of the last public hearing. Then they'll pass to usually House or Senate Ways and Means, which is where bills go that have something to do with legislative appropriations. And Ways and Means doesn't usually host public hearings. So typically, we won't see what's being done during that process. That's one reason that for the stipend reform campaign, for those that are aware of the ballot measure that we're trying to get on the ballot next year for 2026, that actually has a requirement for committees to move back to having public markup sessions where you can actually see them working on legislation. They used to meet in person and you could actually go and they'd be, in a room in the legislature. So committee votes, just getting the vote is kind of even a stand-in for what used to happen. So that usually, once it's moved to House Ways or Means, we won't see what's happening in committee. That's when it's important to step up our advocacy with our representatives to try to get it for a vote on the floor. Because if it gets to the floor, that's when we'll see. I mean, maybe some debate back and forth. We might see amendments filed to it, and that's when we'll get another chance at seeing it debated in public. That makes sense.
There's a question
Thanks. Yeah.
in the chat. Um, this question is about submitting a bill to both the House and Senate. Someone was asking if it's useful to submit to both, or is it maybe better to submit to whichever one has been more favorable toward that issue?
Do you want to answer that one, Sydney?
Um, I'm fine with you answering it,
Okay.
honestly.
Yeah, so typically bills will be submitted to both House and Senate. I think that's the easiest way to get it moved through the process because, it has to be passed by both chambers in order for it to be moved forward. So it's helpful if the, House members are already aware that that's going to be on their docket for the year. There has been changes to the joint committee structure where now House members vote out House filed bills and Senate members vote out Senate filed bills. So there might be some change in the in strategy. But as far as I know, it's still recommended for things to be submitted in both houses. Zaylin, did you have a question?
Yeah, one question. Thank you, Scotia. It's a great meeting. My question revolves around I emailed my state rep about the public records law and how the legislature, the governor, and the judicial branch are kind of like not really following it. So first thing, could you explain it a little bit? And then second thing, I got a response from the legislature, and she said that because of constituent private information in those public records, that's why she doesn't want to release it. So those 2 points.
You're talking about the public records law?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Massachusetts is one of the only states in the country where our legislators, our just judiciary, and the governor's office hold themselves exempt from public records law. So most places in the country, things like, legislative appropriations, even down to how much they're spending on staples every year, stuff like that would be subject to public records. We cannot access those because they write the law that all the municipal governments have to follow, but they exempt themselves from it. So, one of the things that's going to be on the ballot next year will be about making public records law applied to the governor's office and the legislature. And yeah, the facts about specific constituent information is often an argument raised for why legislators don't support it. But the law as written, every law, as written that's been introduced with regards to public records law includes exemptions for things that are really personal. So, feel free to say that in a response to your legislator is that, that's a fair question. Do they not think that the exemptions are sufficient? And kind of why do they need further exemptions? Because a lot of those things would already be exempt from public records law.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Yeah.
I think I can take one more question, and then we're gonna have to call it for the night. But I really appreciate all the folks who've stayed, all of you for making time in your evening tonight. Yeah, I think Travis gave a great answer to that last question in the chat. Private info can be redacted. I'm gonna add our email address in the chat just in case anybody has any final questions that they want to have addressed. Feel free to send us an email at that email. Isa, did you want to do one last question?
Hi, yes, thank you. This was fantastic. And I also love seeing so many people here tonight interested in this topic. I am super confused about extensions. And does the Beacon Hill tracker, if a bill was given an extension, does the Beacon Hill tracker give the updated date for the extension? And then the second part of all of this, if you could verify, is I'm under the impression that the December 3rd deadline applied only to the Senate and the joint committees, but that the House bills had their own deadline for the 17th, I think it is. Is that correct? And does that mean we're going to have to wait a whole more time to find out the status of that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the December 3rd deadline applies to all joint committees. The House, and here's another thing that maybe we should have said at the beginning when you're learning about your legislators' committees. Only joint committees really touch substantial legislation. So if your senator or representative is on a Senate or House only committee, 9 times out of 10, their committee is never assigned any bills and they don't do any substantive legislative work. So you can consider that a nice title that they've been given with a sweet, sweet stipend from House and Senate leadership. The only exception for that is House Ways and Means and Senate Ways and Means. So those are the only two like chamber specific committees that actually tend to do legislative work. The December 3rd deadline applies for House and Senate bills. I believe that they have different requirements on the two sides for how they process their deadlines. So how they're able to give themselves deadline extensions, which is one of the confusing pieces of it. The Beacon Hill tracker is picking up deadline extensions. So if you look it up in the Beacon Hill tracker, it should be able to tell you whether or not the bill's been given a deadline extension and thus whether it's just run past its deadline or, whether it's just run past its deadline or it was like technically kosher that the bill hasn't been reported out yet.
But it is entirely possible that it was given an extension, but hasn't been reported yet that it was given an extension.
Yes,
potentially.
that is also possible. I think that we're seeing that a lot of bills that had their deadline on December 3rd just haven't had the website updated, which is crazy because, this legislature has 800 staff, and, they kind of have one job, which is telling us what they're doing. Yeah. And feel free to reach out to your legislators about this, they're your point of contact for the legislature. So even if you're, just confused about something, they should be hearing when their website is so confusing that we have to have an hour-long workshop to figure out how to use it. Feel free to reach out to them about this. But yeah, that would be my thoughts on the deadline. Any other questions before we break? Thank you guys so much for your patience and your willingness to work through this. You will be hearing from us with the slides and with the recording of the workshop.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. This is great.
And
Appreciate
sign
it.
up for the Saturday Scoop. You'll hear from us more.
Mhm.